And welcome everyone, and let's get started. Parshat Vayishlach. Usually I send out questions on the Parsha just to get some ideas of what the topics are going to be. And usually there's 5, 6 questions, maybe 7. Today I have a total of 8. It's an action-packed class today. I hope we are able to get through everything that that's planned. God willing, and in a clear way that everybody can understand and get things from. So we always start with a quick summary of the parsha. There's really, you can summarize this parsha into just a few sentences if you wanted. On his way home, Yaakov meets up with Eisav. There's a confrontation. It's a friendly confrontation, even though Yaakov seems to have planned for all kinds of other alternatives. And nevertheless, it's a rather friendly confrontation after all. And then Yaakov settles in a place called Shechem, where his daughter is taken, and the two brothers, in particular Levi and Shimon, then fight for her honor and then sack the city, and that's pretty much where the parsha ends. Also, should probably mention also Rachel dies, and she dies while giving birth to Benjamin, and that's pretty much the parsha in a nutshell. But there's a lot of beautiful details that we will hopefully be able to uncover together. So let me share my screen so everybody has the text that I had sent out earlier. That'll be right here. All right, Baruch Hashem. Yay. Okay, so let's begin with the first question. So like I said, Yaakov had planned for all kinds of alternatives, in particular, he prepared for war. So one of the things that the pasuk says he does is he says Vayomer, he separates the two groups. Vayomer im yavo Eisav el machane ha'achat. If Eisav attacks one of the camps, vehikahu, and he attacks it, v'haya hamachane hanichar, the remaining camp, l'fleita, will be able to will separate, will be able to survive, will be able to escape. So so already you might be thinking some questions on that assumption of his. After all, if Eisav destroys one camp, couldn't he destroy the other camp too? Separating the camps makes them weaker, unless he's trying to flank his opponent on both sides in an aggressive attack. That is a defensive method. Separating a camp isn't always the best idea. So Rashi tells us, what was he thinking? That the other camp will survive. Al-Korcho. Al-Korcho usually means like against his will, or in spite of him, or by force. For force, the other camp will for sure survive. Really? For sure? Why will it for sure survive? So the answer to why it might for sure survive comes from a sefer called Chanukah Torah, which has very little to do with Hanukkah, and I have the relevant part in bold here. But let me just read real quick. Again, the question is, Yaakov separated his camp into two parts, assuming that if one side is attacked, the other camp would be able to survive. Now, it could be, you could answer, could be that there'll be enough time while one camp is being sacked, the other camp will have time technically to get away, but you don't know that. There's no proof of that. And Rashi makes it clear, al-korcho, it's for sure, it's a definite, per force, it has to happen that the second camp will survive. There has to be a reason. What's he thinking? So it says the Chanukah Torah, al-korcho, for sure the second camp will survive. A kasha, question, Dilma lo yashir, maybe it won't survive. Chas v'shalom, he says. Maybe it will also fall. Maybe the second camp will also be destroyed. So first, to answer the question, you need to know the midrash. And by the way, I looked for this midrash. I couldn't find exactly which one he's referring to. It says "Hamachane achat haita rechoka mimachane shniya mahalech yom." The first camp was far enough away from the second camp by a day. It was a day's journey to the next. That's how far he separated the two camps. Or actually, interestingly, I want to point out, it seems like he planned on doing it. I don't think he actually accomplished that, because when Eisav actually catches up to Yaakov, maybe he came earlier than Yaakov expected. I don't know. But either way, everybody was together. All of the maidservants and all of the sons and the daughter and all of his wives were all in one place. So I'm not sure that Yaakov was successful in separating the camps, but at least he planned to. And the plan was that one camp would be one day away from the other camp. Now, how's that going to help? So it says Chanukat Torah, Yidua, Yaakov halach, b'machane harishona. Yaakov was in that first camp. And here's the bold part. Rivka Amra Lama Eshkel Gam Shnechem b'yom echad. Why should I mourn both sons on one day? Knowing that the prophecy being Yaakov and Eisav Yemutu b'yom echad, that they would die on the same day. By the way, again, this is an aside, but we'll get to this possibly when we get to Parshat Vayichi. But when Yaakov died, it was not the same day that Eisav died. They were possibly, according to the Midrash, buried on the same day, but we don't really know what day Eisav died, aside from, of course, the Midrash, which we'll get to, God willing, then. But anyway, Rivka's prophecy that they would be buried on the same day does not actually mean that they would die on the same day. But again, assuming that as things are normally, that people are buried on the day that they die, or right after. So that under that assumption, so Yaakov was one day away from the other camp. And if Yaakov would have fallen, then Eisav would have fallen on the same day. And then he could not have gotten to the second camp. That's the assumption. That's the logic there. Again, knowing that their mother prophesied that he and Eisav would die on the same day, and he knew that therefore that the other camp was safe because it was one day away. Interestingly enough, and I couldn't find this in the actual Sefer. So the Chanukat Torah is written by Rav Avram Yehoshua Heschel of Krakow in the 17th century Poland. So an interesting thing about if you go back to the word that means that the camp will attack that Eisav will attack the other camp. The word is vihikahu. So vav hey kaf hey vav. What is that word? What do we call that in English when the word can be read either way? The same, it's spelled with the same letters. It's called a palindrome, like taco cat or race car. Right? So Vihikahu is a palindrome. Although yes, obviously the vowels are different, but at least the consonant letters vav, hey, kaf, hey, vav are created palindrome. And says the Dat Chachamim that the lesson here is whoever attacks, whoever attempts to harm the Jews will themselves be harmed in the end. So attack us, it'll boomerang right back at you. That's the lesson there. All right, let's continue from there. All right, Baruch Hashem. That's how we started out the class. First pasuk, actually the second pasuk, and so we're gonna go little by little here through the whole meeting. After he plans for war and after he plans to separate the camps, what does Yaakov do? The most important thing for any Jew to do in the times of distress, he prays. And he asks Hashem, Hatzileini na miyad achi miyad Eisav. Please save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Eisav. Why? Ki yarei anochi oto pen yavo v'hikani em al banim. I'm afraid he's going to attack me and kill mother with child. So why is he afraid? Why doesn't he trust in Hashem? So there's a lot to discuss there, but not for tonight. Suffice it to say that even the righteous have reasons to be concerned, that they're so humble that they feel that all of their merits have been used up already. But let's go from there. Also, he felt, says Rashi, that Eisav had quite a few merits himself, considering that he lived in the Holy Land and all the mitzvot of kibbud av va'em that Eisav was able to do while he was still living with his parents, etc. Okay, so he asks to deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Eisav. Asks the Beit Halevi, famous question, famous answer. He asks the question, why does Yaakov pray to be rescued from? It says from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Eisav. How do I get rid of that? Moment. Let's do that. Okay, good. All right. So he asks to be rescued from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Eisav. What's going on here? So obviously, if he wants to be rescued from Eisav, he could have just said Eisav. He wants to be rescued from he only has one brother. He doesn't have a ton of other brothers. So what's going on here? So says the Beit Halevi, and this is fundamental Jewish philosophy. He says, Yesh lahavin achrei ki lo haya lo rak ach echad. He only has one brother. Lama hutzrach lomar miyad Eisav. Why did he have to also mention that he had to be rescued from the hand of Eisav? Rama miyad achi kvar mavor b'kash. So obviously, if he would have just asked to be saved from his brother, his request would have been pretty clear enough, clear as day, crystal clear. So what's going on? The Ayin Bazar. So he quotes from the Zohar, where it says in the Zohar in Aramaic here, it says that from this pasuk we learn how careful you have to be when you pray. When you daven, you have to be very specific. It's not enough to, let's say you have a friend named Schwartz, right? And God forbid this friend named Schwartz is ill. You shouldn't just say, Hashem, please heal my friend Schwartz, because you're not clear enough. So that's why we have to say the person's name, the person's mother's name, etc. So first of all, that's one thing that the Beit Halevi points out, is that Yaakov is being very clear about who he needs to be saved from. And then here we're going to skip to the underlined part. The gam tuvato avato shel Eisav ra haita etzel Yaakov. Now you have to keep in mind there's actually two aspects of Eisav. Eisav is Eisav, the evil one, the Eisav Harasha. Eisav is also the Achi, the brother of Yaakov. He is literally biologically his brother. And what Yaakov is asking for from Hashem is to be rescued from both things. From Achi, from the niceness of my brother, as much as from the evil of my brother. So if Eisav is coming as my brother, and he's coming with hugs and kisses, so that might seem like a nice thing. And on the other hand, if he's coming for war, so save me from him if he's going to come with knives out, all ready to kill me. So he says he wants to be rescued, as the underlined part here says, Lo la'ach, lo la'esav. I don't need him to be my brother. I don't need him to be an Eisav. Save me either way. Because what's going to happen is Eisav, as in his evil form, will try to kill me for sure, but being smothered by Eisav's love is just as bad. So the Beit Halevi continues, Kol Maseh Avad Hem Siman Lebanim. We've had this concept multiple times. The idea is that what happens to our forefathers is a harbinger, is a hint to what's going to happen in the future to the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, too, have a constant struggle with the Gentile nations around them, some who want to kill us, and some who want to smother us with love. As the underlined parts here say from the Beit Halevi, Gozer Gezerot Ra'ot, sometimes they have evil decrees against us. We have to wear a patch, we have to live in a ghetto, or worse, right? They try to kill us. So that's bad. Don't get me wrong. But when they're also nice to us, that can also be bad. That can backfire. When when presidential candidates are fawning over the Jews and trying to all be super nice to Israel, so that can be nice. It definitely feels good, but on the other hand, it can backfire. And whoever feels that they have ownership because they've given enough money or given enough support, those people also feel like they have control. and then they can make decrees and make statements that can be that we have to separate ourselves from. So it's a sort of a catch-22 we find ourselves in sometimes, or often when we live in amongst Gentile nations. That's exactly what the Beit Halevi is writing about. He goes on in quite some detail, and of course he's writing about 100 years ago now or more. That indeed we have to be careful about how we deal with the Gentile nations. Their kindness can kill also. We have to be careful. We have to be weary of intermarriage. We have to be weary of accepting their culture. We've had several classes in the last few weeks about Thanksgiving and Halloween, and this concept of accepting Gentile culture has been sort of a repeating theme throughout Torah. That's how the Jews have been able to survive, and that's one of the famous messages of Hanukkah. That's what the Jews who were not Hellenized yet. That's what they were fighting against. They were fighting the Hellenized Jews, the Mityavnim, in order to show them that yes, indeed, the Jewish faith is unique, and the Jewish faith needs to stand out on its own. We don't have to hide under the cover of another culture. So that theme is in this week's parsha. Believe it or not, this very important theme of how a Jew can survive in Galut, which is fundamental. For the last 2,000 years or so, we've been in Galut. So we need to know how to survive. This is it. This is how we survive. We don't want we don't want their bite. We don't want their kisses. We want the Gentile nations need to not have control over the Jewish people. That's clear. Let's continue to the next pasuk that we're going to go over after the prayers and after some time. This is a famous incident I'm sure you've heard of before. We're going to get another insight into it today, I hope. Two psukim, v'yikachem v'avirem et hanachal v'yaver et asher lo. So Yaakov takes his family over the river. After taking them across the stream, he then comes back for his possessions. And the Gemara, as we're going to see, calls them pachim ketanim, small vessels, little chashkas, right? And it says, V'yivater Yaakov levado, he was alone, because he sent away his family. Now he's there alone. V'yavik ish imo ad alot hashachar, and the men wrestled with him until alot hashachar, until the beginning of dawn. So, and that's the famous wrestling that Yaakov does with the angel of Eisav. We'll talk about that in a moment. But meanwhile, let's talk about these pachim ketanim. What's going on here? So the Gemara in Chulin, Tzadi Aleph, Amud Aleph. So on the way bottom. So it talks about, it goes into great detail about the whole, because the actual perek is all about the halachot of Gid Hanasha, which we'll talk about shortly. But in that perek, it talks about the source of this halacha, the source of the halacha that we don't eat the sciatic nerve. And one of the reasons we don't eat the sciatic nerve, the main reason we don't eat the sciatic nerve, is because the Torah tells us not to. Because Yaakov was fighting with this other, let's call it person. That's what the pasuk calls him. It turns out the Gemara tells us, and the Midrashim tell us, that it was the Sar Shel Eisav, the actual angel of the nation of Eisav, that he was wrestling with. Either way, when he saw that he couldn't defeat him in any other way, he hit him on the kaf hayerach. He caught him, hit him in the pubic area, on the hip, more or less, and Yaakov was then injured and had to limp. Whether the limp is from the injuries or not, it's a different discussion for another time. But anyway, let's go back to why was he over there getting these tchotchkes? As we're going to see later on, Yaakov does not seem to be the type of person who cares so much about his possessions. His possessions are that important. He gets his family and his things safely across the river. He's going to come back for these little things. What's going on? So the Gemara in Chulin 91a, as said before, quotes the pasuk that he was left alone, he was levado, and then it quotes, so it says pachim ketanim. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says, "Shayir al pachim ketanim." He had left over these little jugs. Mekan, you learn from here, letzadikim shechaviv alehem amonam. For a tzaddik, their money is worth more to them, yoter megufam, even more than their bodies. Their possessions, their things, are worth more to them than their bodies. All the more so, why do they care so much about their things? Because they don't reach out their hands to steal. They don't reach out their hands to steal. So why do they care? Why do tzaddikim care so much about their possessions, about their things, but even their little tchotchkes? Because they didn't steal them. They earned them. So writes Rav Belsky, Zeichet Tzaddik Levracha. This is all in English, so it would be easier for some of us to follow along. It says in Hilchot Etrog, take up only a few pages in the Shulchan Aruch. Choshen Mishpat, which is 1/4 of the Shulchan Aruch, on the other hand, is treated over hundreds of pages. Choshen Mishpat deals with the laws of business, honesty. There are many times more halachot, and much must be considered to ensure that one's earnings are clean of any defect. Thus, $1 earned through the fulfillment of the whole range of Dina Mamonot represents much more chavivut mitzvah than the etrog in our story. This explains why Yaakov Avinu returned for a few seemingly worthless jugs. Yaakov Avinu acquired a veritable fortune in Padan Aram. V'hilo shor, v'chamor, tzon, v'eved, v'shivcha, cattle, donkeys, flocks, servants, maidservants. Yet every single item, even those jugs, was a chavsa shel mitzvah, an article with which a mitzvah is performed, because Yaakov acquired them through the exact fulfillment of all the laws of money, the laws of proper handling of money. Every penny that Yaakov Avinu possessed, every item that he owned, was cleaner and more beautiful than the most perfect etrog that ever existed. This is what Chazal mean when they say that tzaddikim chavivim alehem mamonam yotem megufam. Even the tiniest things he owns are a chefza shel mitzvah, because he does not take what is not his. All his olam hazeh is a chefza shel mitzvah. It was unconscionable that Yaakov Avinu would let even the smallest portion of his estate go to waste. It is important to appreciate the challenge of making an honest living. No Yetzer Hara works to convince you to buy a not kosher etrog, a pasul etrog. With money, however, one must be extremely vigilant. The thousands of halachot that guide our commercial involvement bear witness to the constant pull of the Yetzer Hara we face. First and foremost, the money we make must be clean and kosher. It should greatly disturb a person if his earnings are blemished at least as much as it would upset him if his etrog had a spot. There are, unfortunately, businessmen that lead a double life. They learn, they pray, they put on an air of frumkeit. However, when it comes to business, they amass their wealth through crooked means that have no heter, have no permission. They have crossed the line into Esav's domain and put themselves at the mercy of the Sar Shel Eisav. They may very well suffer the consequences of Doron and Milchama. Doron and Milchama are some of the ways that Yaakov prepared for war with gifts and war. So, in other words, these people, these businessmen, says the Rav Belsky, are going to be left with quite a surprise. He concludes, the Jew must always attempt to treat the world as the whole world, as a chefza shel mitzvah, and ensure that everything that passes through his fingers is a davar kadosh, has intricate spiritual value. This nikiyut, this purity, gives his money chavivut and kedusha, gives his money importance and holiness. The Erlich Yid emulates the perfection of Yaakov Avinu and is immune to the threat of Eisav. Ki sharid im elokim v'im anashim v'tochal. For you have battled with angels and men, and you have prevailed. That's what the angel says to Yaakov. He has created with his own hand a protective barrier of kedusha that Eisav cannot possibly break through. When you eat the labor of your hand, you're praiseworthy, and it is well with you, says Tehillim. Ashrecha b'kol ha'olam hazeh, v'tov lach olam haba. It is praiseworthy in this world, it is well with you in the world to come. So Rav Belsky here is giving a blessing to anyone who eats, who keeps mitzvot carefully, especially the mitzvot of honest business, that everything they receive is going to have a bracha in it in this world and in the next. Okay, let's continue from there. The next pasuk. So again, he fights and he gets hit over there, and then the Torah says, "Al kain lo yachlu bnei Yisrael et gid hanashe asher al kaf hayerech ad hayom hazeh ki naga b'chaf yerech Yaakov b'gid hanashe." That is why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the socket of the hip, since Jacob's hip socket was wrenched at the thigh muscle. Okay. So our ancestor Yaakov was hit in this place on the thigh. Therefore, we have a halacha not to eat that part of an animal. That's fine with you? You're okay with that? It's a good thing. It's a good thing he wasn't hit somewhere else, right? Because then we wouldn't be able to eat ribs. We wouldn't be able to eat the leg. So what's with the thigh? What's one thing that has to do with the other? It's an animal. It's not Yaakov. The animal doesn't represent Yaakov. The Yaakov got hit over there. What does that have to do with not eating the animal and that part of the animal? What's one thing got to do with the other? So for that, we're going to look at the Malbim and his contemporary Rav Hirsch. I just recently realized they were very, very contemporary. We're literally a year apart. And although they lived in different parts of of Europe, East and West, certainly worth investigation if they had any correspondence with each other. I haven't found any, but I'm looking into it because it's fascinating. It's very similar styles in terms of they looked at Dikduk, grammar a lot, and they also a lot of what they wrote was in a defense of Judaism against the attacks of the reform movement of the time. So interesting, just a tidbit of historical information there. They literally they were born and died like a year apart from each other. It's very interesting. Anyway, so says the Malbim. He was in Russia. The Rav Hirsch was in Germany. Okay. So therefore, the pasuk says, the Jews do not eat the gid hanashe. So says the Malbim, achar kibasar shenachol mithapech lebasar adam anazon. So the meat that we eat in an animal is somehow connected to a person. What's going on? Im kain isur machilat hatmeim. We only have to be careful about not eating not kosher animals and not eating disgusting animals. So here he says, in the underlined part here, ki b'zeh yikana ha'ochel teva adores v'achzariyut. So what he's saying is, it is from this area. Why don't we eat non-kosher animals? Says one of the reasons is because we don't want to input into our bodies, right, the same kind of disgustingness that's in those disgusting animals. Those non-kosher animals are disgusting. They're gross. They eat all kinds of things. They're hunters. They're violent. They have they rage. We don't want that. We don't want that in our bodies, because that'll affect our. By the way, he's paraphrasing here the Rambam. This idea that we are what we eat. We're affected by the food that we put into our bodies, spiritually as well. Al Kain. Therefore, achar sharu ki nega v'kaf yerech Yaakov. Right. So we see that if he was hit, where was he hit? He was hit in the yerech. He was hit in the thigh, in the central, right by the central organ, in that part of the body. Shebegid hazeh trura hatava v'chamuria. So that is the center of human desire and passion and lust. We don't want that part in us. We don't want that. That's where Yaakov was injured. Ad she'af Yaakov shenifrad b'kol hagashmiuto lo nifrad b'gashmi megid hazeh. So even though Yaakov, who was pure and amazingly holy and spiritual in so many ways, nevertheless, he still had desires, normal human natural desires for sensuality. That's normal. That's good. That's how he was able to have children after all. So so that is what was hit in him. So that is the part we need to protect ourselves from the animals that are still kosher animals, but that part of the animal is not kosher anymore because we don't want that increased in us. We want to have a normal, healthy enjoyment of that. On the other hand, we need to not overdo it. That can lead to bad things. Imkain gam. So let's skip to the next underlined part. Gid habehema shemachto bo koach behami v'tavoni lo shelo yifrad misham. So we don't want that to then be emulated in us. It's interesting when I was reading this, I was reminded of the last Gemara, the very last lines of the Gemara of Avodah Zarah. So over there is an interesting story that occurred in the house of King Shapur, who was the king of Persia, non-Jewish king. So he had two guests with him. He had Mar Yehuda, who was a good from Jewish person, and another wealthy man who was not so religious. His name is Bati Bartuvi. So King Shapur, they brought an etrog, and the king cut it and sliced it and ate it, and then he cut a slice and gave it to Bati Bartuvi, and then he took that knife that he cut the etrog with, and he stuck it in the ground 10 times to take off the shamnunis, to make it like a parv knife, and then he cut the etrog again to give it to this other Jew, Mar Yehuda, right? To the religious Jew, the more religious Jew. Bati Bartuvi said to him, what's going on here? He says, what am I, not Jewish? Lav bar Yisrael? Who am I not a Jewish person? Amalei. So King Shapur answered him, Mar kayam li begvaye, Umar likim li begaye. Ikada Amri. So there's some say Amar le. So what he said to him was, Id karmai avda buurte. I remember what you did last night. So what that means is that King Shapur, in the classic way that even the international businessmen still entertain some of their guests, they try to entertain them with women. So he tried to entertain Mar Yehuda and Bati Bartuvi with ladies, and Mar Yehuda refused because he's a religious Jew. Bati Bartuvi, who seems to care about kosher, and is surprised that the knife wasn't kosher for him, so he wasn't so careful about the ladies the previous night. So King Shapur didn't expect him to keep kosher. Why should he keep kosher? You be consistent. Your God said not to do this, and you did it anyway. So your God, the same God, said to keep kosher. So you're keeping kosher just what, for public appearance? For what? For you want to be under rabbinic supervision? What's going on? So it's an important thing. So the point here is that there's an intricate link between what we eat and how we act in terms of our morality. That's what the Malbim is pointing out, and that's why, of all things, it's the Gid Hanasha in the animal that has to do with sensuality. It's the Gid Hanasha that we still don't eat. It's still not kosher, even though the rest of the animal is 100% kosher. The Gid Hanasha is not, and that's why we don't eat it. So I just also I read in Rav Hirsch an amazing insight, just something we all have to keep in mind, and I see it on a regular basis. He says, and I'll just read you as much as I can of this. He just writes so beautifully. It must be, it must be, it must be inaudible. Uh, it must be audible for you to appreciate it. The memory of this incident, of this angel hitting Yaakov on the hip or thereabouts. The memory of this incident has been preserved for all time for Yaakov's descendants by the prohibition of Gid HaNasheh, as we just said, eating the sciatic nerve. The prohibition is surely not intended to inform Yaakov's descendants of the historical fact that their forefather limped as a result of a wrestling match, just as it is inconceivable that the prohibition of chametz is intended only to inform us of the kind of bread our ancestors ate when they left Egypt. That's not enough. That's not enough reason. He limped, so therefore for 3,000 years you're going to eat this. We couldn't get bread, so for 2,000 years you're going to... no, it doesn't make sense, right? That's not enough of a reason. So both these facts, in and of themselves, are of little importance, and their commemoration by means of a divine commandment can be explained only by the assumption that they bear truths of deep significance to our destiny as a people. These truths are given everlasting expression and renewal through the dietary restriction. In other words, we learn things from what we eat. Our halachot of kashrut have to do with more than just an incident, a past historical event. It has to do with right now. Something right now is happening that we need to, that kosher is trying to teach us how to deal with. So our sages attach such significance to the prohibition our sages attach such significance to this prohibition in their interpretation of Yeshayahu 9:7-14. The prophet there says, and I'll just skip to the English, God sent a word upon Yaakov and it found its place in Yisrael. All the people shall learn to know it, Ephraim and the inhabitants of Shomron, who in ignorance and hardiness say, bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with hewn stone. Sycamores have been cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. And though God has set Rezin's adversaries against him, the people still do not return to the one who truly strikes them, and they do not seek God's Savakot, the God and God's legions. Our sages in Chulin interpret Davar Shlach Hashem Yaakov Ze Gid HaNasheh. Of what is the word that was sent upon Yaakov? That's the Gid HaNasheh. Again, quoting from Chulin 91a, as earlier. The prohibition of Gid HaNasheh was a word set upon Yaakov, and it found its place in Israel. The prohibition has spread through Israel. In light of all this, so what's he getting to? In light of all this, there is no doubt about the meaning of the prohibition. Throughout their long struggle, Saro Shel Eisav, the angel of Eisav, was unable to defeat Yaakov, was unable to throw him down. He was able to dislocate his joint and prevent him from using his material power. Thus will Yaakov make his way through history, limping, unable to stand on both feet, without a firm stand and a firm walk. This lack of stability is a necessary condition for opening Esav's eyes. If Yaakov too had stood at the head of his 400 warriors, his invincible endurance would not have revealed the finger of God in history. Therefore, the descendants of Yaakov, who precisely through his material weakness will become Yisrael, will attest to God whose power overwhelms everything else, are not to eat the sinew of submission and material weakness. In other words, it's because we're weak that we prove that Hashem exists. That famous essay from Mark Twain about how the Jew is the proof of God's existence, because as weak as we've been, as much as we've been attacked by other nations, we're still around. That's exactly what Rav Hirsch is talking about. We are proof of God's existence because of our weakness, not because, oh, the Israeli army is strong because it has such great tacticians and it has great technology. No, the Israeli army is great because Hashem makes it so. Let's see that as he continues. Whenever Yaakov's descendants sit down to eat, they are to be confronted by this admonition from the chronicle of their life's wanderings. They are to willingly forgo the sinew, forgo their physical strength, which is given over to Eisav. They must not think that their survival depends on that kind of strength. Just think they're not armed with the sword like Eisav. Sorry, just because they're not armed with the sword like Eisav and cannot even walk the earth with a firm stride, They should not consider themselves unprotected without security in the vicissitudes of time. The strength of Yaakov Yisrael depends on the other higher powers against which the sword of Eisav cannot prevail. If Yaakov falls, he falls not because of his limited physical power, but because he fails to cultivate God's protection. Conversely, if Yisrael stands firm, it is not because of his physical and material strength, but because God bears him aloft on the eagle's wings of his almighty power. That's the message. You can read on on your own, but it's not because of our military strength. It's not because we've got such great, strong Jewish boxers in the world and such wrestlers and such muscle men. That's not what makes Judaism strong. What makes Judaism strong is the fact that most of us are weak, physically, power, or politically, or whatever. We are not a strong nation. What makes us strong is Hashem and our allegiance to Him. That's the message here. It's just this morning, I heard a song, and I was considering sharing with you the title and everything. I'm not sure I will, because although it's a very powerful, moving song, what it is a bunch of Israeli pop artists got together and wrote a song basically about how we're strong, we can conquer anything. So it's one of those songs that has like a huge cast, 50-something different artists. Most, I don't know any of them really, honestly. Half of them were women. They're different colors. Some of them are Ethiopian, different nationalities, Russian, Moroccan. Everybody singing together. Men and women. None of the women know how to cover their belly buttons. Interesting video. But anyway, regardless of all, there's some rappers involved. Okay, so not one that I could see, not one dati, not one religious singer, as if there aren't any religious singers in Israel. No Gad Elbaz, right? No Yishai Ribo, all secular singers. But what are they saying? And no mention of religion or how Hashem rescues them. There's a hint to Shabbat. There's the ruach, the reach of Shabbat, the smell of Shabbat, coffee on the balcony. Right? So it's all a very nice, romanticized version of Israeli culture, which doesn't really exist. But we're not going to get into that right now. But what's interesting is not a mention of Hashem. All of the things that we get through, we don't get through alone. We don't get through because we're strong and together. When we're united, we do anything we can't. No, it's not true. When we're united, we build a Tower of Babel. That's what happens when we're united without Hashem. Okay, lots of times in Jewish history, the Jews have been united. The only thing that really unites all of Jews, Torah. So that's when we're ish echad belev echad. So we'll talk more about that in the future. If you have questions, we'll deal with that at the end. Meanwhile, let's get to the next pasuk. So finally, Yaakov and Eisav meet, and one of the more famous exchanges in all of this is right here. These next few pasukim. So it says, Eisav. So Yaakov tries to convince Eisav to take a lot of gift, a lot of animals that Yaakov is about to give away, and Eisav says no. Says, Eisav, Yesh li Rav, I have enough. Achi, my brother, Yehi lecha asher lach. Keep whatever's yours. Yaakov, if I found favor in your eyes, classic biblical terminology. If you like me, in other words, take my mincha, take my offering to you, from my hand. Your face is like the face of God. And please receive me. Please enjoy what I'm offering you. So, how is he the face of God? So it could be, as Rashi points out, could be because he wrestled Esav's angel. He now realized that the angel looks exactly like his brother. Okay, maybe you didn't notice that before. But aside from that, Rav Hirsch points out that Eisav is fully formed here, fully like he has his own nation. That's what it means to be an Elohim, to be a leader. Not only that, but he seems to have conquered his own Yetzer Hara. He's hugged and kissed his brother. He's not violent. He's somehow in control of his emotions. So in a way, Eisav is doing pretty well. pretty well for himself and pretty well even spiritually, it seems like. To be able to conquer one's Yetzer is the hardest challenge in the world. And here's Eisav not killing his brother when he has the full opportunity to do so. So whatever. Anyway, so it says, please take my offering, kachna et birchati. Please take this present, asher huvatlach, that I'm offering you, kichanini elokim, ki yesh li kol. I have everything I need. Yifter bo v'yikach. And then he finally convinced him, and Eisav took it. Okay. So Rashi points out on the phrase yesh li kol, I have everything. Kol sipuki. So he says, I have everything I need. The Eisav, what did Eisav say? David Lashon Gava. Lashon, he spoke in a very proud way. He said, Yesh li rav, I have enough. Yoter v'yofer migdei tzarki. I have more than enough, more than what I need. I have enough. Yesh li rav. So the phraseology is very significant, because what Rashi is pointing out is that Eisav is haughty. He never really has enough. But that's not really so different from everybody else. Let me explain. Says the Chafetz Chaim in the Chafetz Chaim al Torah. He quotes this Rashi, right? V'efshar gam lomar ki b'shnei b'dgamim halalu habiu shnehem et hashikpotehem al ha'olam hazeh. So really, what Eisav is pointing out is that he has enough in this world. Eisav amar yesh li rav. I have enough. Kolomar amnam yesh li harbe. I have a lot. Harbe, right? Harbe coming from the same root as rav, meaning a lot. Somebody who has one coin wants hundreds of coins. Yaakov amar yesh li kol. When Yaakov said, I have everything, Kolomar lo chasar limu, I'm not lacking anything. I have everything I need. That's what a tzaddik is, says the Chafetz Chaim. Eisav Natan Eina b'mamon v'chamdat ha'olam v'Yaakov mistapek b'mashi yeshlo. So Eisav wants more and more and more, because it's never enough. Yaakov is saying, I have yesh li kol, I have everything, meaning, indeed, I don't need anything else, right? Because like a tzaddik is perfectly happy with what they have. So that's our goal as we grow in this world. I just heard in the morning somebody was talking about some famous millionaire who died recently, and I guess reports are coming out that he was hooked on laughing gas, and it could be rich, and you think you have it all, and everybody who looks at you thinks, that guy's got it all, that girl's got it all, and then what happens is you find out these people are addicted. These people are all kinds of problems. I remember walking in a fancy neighborhood once with a rabbi, and I said, "Oh, that's a nice house." He said, "Yeah, that's a nice house on the outside, but you don't know what's going on inside. Right? You don't know, right? It's an important lesson." All right. So we continue after the meeting. We'll probably in future years, God willing, we'll be able to talk more about more details about this famous meeting of Yaakov and Eisav. But in the last 10 minutes of class, I'd like to go on to the other incidents of the parsha. There's quite a bit more to talk about. Let's see. God willing, we'll have enough time. I think we can do this. So it talks about Dina. Right? Dina was taken by Shechem. Takes a Dina but Leah. The pasuk begins by telling us Dina was a daughter of Leah, Asher Yaldi Yaakov, that she was born to Yaakov Lirod Ibnot Haaretz. She went out to go to look at the daughters of the land. So Chazal, in general, they sort of blame, at least partially, it's partially Leah's fault for what happened to her. She was out. She was looking around. She was trying to assess what was happening with the ladies in town, and what was happening to them happened to her. So the question that the Mayan Bet Hashoeva points out, Rav Schwab, what he asks is, why does it say Asher Yalda Yaakov, that Dina was a daughter of Leah that was born to Yaakov? Don't we already know that? So first of all, it's not a totally original question. Rav Schwab is going to quote this Gemara anyway, but the Gemara in Brachot, also really close to the end of Brachot, asks why, asks this question. V'achar Yalda bat Tikra et Shema Dina. That's her name. Why Achar? Why does it say Achar? So it says Dina bat Leah, Din Me'atzah Amra. So he talks about there how Dina was actually supposed to be technically in the womb. She might have been a boy, and then Dina Davin, she judged herself, and that's why her name was changed to Dina. That's why not changed. That's why she called her Dina, because she judged herself. Leah did, because she saw that if she would have had another boy, that she would have had then her sister Rachel would not have been able to have more than one son if the prophecy was true, and they believed it was, and it was, that the Yaakov would have 12 sons altogether. They knew that there would be 12 tribes from Yaakov. Shisha Yatzim Mena, she does the math, and she basically sorry? There we go. That's my own voice coming back to me. Okay, so says Rav Schwab. The Gemara here mentions basically through the birth of Dina, says the Gemara, Yaakov fulfilled Pru'urvu. We know Pru'urvu, the first mitzvah in the Torah, to be fruitful and multiply, isn't fulfilled by somebody unless they have a boy and a girl. Some say 2 boys, 2 girls, but so says Rav Schwab, Amar Asher Yalda Yaakov. Why does it say that Dina was born to Yaakov? Dina Zachar in the Keva. So she changed Dina from Zachar to Nekeva. As Kayam Yaakov Avinu lemelita chiyuv prirvia. So because she became a girl, Yaakov was then yotze the mitzvah. He fulfilled the mitzvah of prurvu. Okay, so now we have a big question. Some of you are probably thinking this. Was the midrash lamad amar shelo nolda the omos im hashvatim? Well, what about this midrash that tells us? You guys have probably heard this before. Each one of the shvatim was born with a twin. This is a big problem, because if they were all born with a twin sister, so Yaakov had fulfilled his obligation of prurvu already with the first child, right? He already had a boy, he already had a girl. You have a boy and a girl to fulfill the mitzvah of prurvu, according to most opinions. So what's going on here? Even according to the opinion that they're actual sisters. So by the way, I had a conversation with my daughter while walking to shul last week about this. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to have all had twin girls. I mean, literally, the midrash says it, so it must mean something. But for them to actually literally have these sisters and then to marry them is a problem. We believe they kept the mitzvot, so that's definitely not allowed. So what's happening? So says Rav Schwab, and here's the main point here. To umot, the kavana of saying that they were twins, he nashim hamityamim mityamot. They were fitting women. In other words, each tribe, each shevet was born with a perfect mate who existed just for him amongst the other nations, perhaps, or definitely, or maybe they were somehow in Yaakov's household, but not in the family. They weren't actually literally twins. So that's how he explains that midrash. I just wanted to point that out just as an aside, because it was something that's bothered me for a long time. It's a different way to look at the parsha once you realize that the midrashim do not have to be taken literally. Okay, let's keep going. We have 2 more psukim to go. We've got 4 minutes. I think we can do this. So then after this is a long piece, so I don't know how we're going to get there. Okay, I'll have to say it out. No problem. All right, so the children of Yaakov, particularly Shimon and Levi, destroyed Shechem, the whole town. because what they did to Dina. And how are they allowed to destroy a whole town for this? How are they allowed to kill out a whole town? How is this ethical? So the Rambam in Mishnah Torah in Hilchot Malachim and Perek Tet Halacha Yud Daled says, and I made this part in bold. I just to skip around. Because they did not keep the law. There are 7 laws of Noah. We've talked about these before. One of them is that you have to have a court of justice. And because they did not have a court of justice, or they allowed Hamor to do this thing to Dina and didn't punish him for rape, how could that be just? So because they didn't have a court of justice, they deserve the death penalty. Shechem Gazal Shechem had indeed kidnapped somebody. They came row, they saw it, and they knew below the new and they didn't judge him. So therefore, they punished him. So the Rambam does not have a commentary on the Torah, right? But 100 years, actually, less than 100 years later, the Ramban does have a commentary on the Torah, and he, in his commentary on Torah, in this pasuk, takes great issue with the Rambam. It's a very long essay. I'm not going to obviously read the whole thing, but here's the point. He asks the question. The Ramban asks the question: how is this possible that the Rambam is saying that the Gentiles nations here are worthy of the death penalty for not punishing Shechem? That's all they did? How about the Avodah Zarah? How about the Gila Arad? How about the immorality that was happening? All of the sins that the Canaanite nations, that Hashem over and over again throughout the Torah tells us they were worthy of the death penalty, that the Jews had to kick them out and come into the land of Israel. Weren't Shechem doing all these things? Why didn't the sons of Yaakov destroy them as well? So the Ramban's answer is although they were doing these things, it wasn't the place of the sons of Yaakov to do this. It was not their job. It's not their job to judge them just because they didn't do this. There has to be a system, and they weren't following any system. Right? So he says specifically, it wasn't their place to do this justice. And because they did this, it was actually the wrong thing to do. And that's why several times Yaakov either addresses them or is upset with them, is because of what they did was not right. They had no ethical right to go into this nation and sack it and destroy it just because of the sins of their ignoring. They were basically out for blood because their sister was molested. And on an emotional level, it's forgivable, but they had no right to do that, no legal right to do that. They took the law into their own hands, and that's a big problem, and that's what the Ramban writes. So he has a big problem with what the Rambam writes in halacha. Now, in that particular halacha, anyway. So, just to conclude this class with something very beautiful, very very nice thought that I saw in the Chomat Anoch, but I can't find it anywhere anymore. I couldn't find the source. So the Chomat Anoch was written by the Chida, and over here in the pasuk, besides the angel of Eisav telling Yaakov that his name is now Yisrael, later on in the parsha, Hashem says, Elohim says, Shimcha Yaakov lo yikare, don't call yourself Yaakov. Shimcha od Yaakov, don't call your name Yaakov anymore. Ki im Yisrael yeshemecha. Your name is now Yisrael. Shimcha v'yikra es shemo Yisrael, and he named him Yisrael. So now Yaakov's name is Yisrael. Now Yisrael is supposed to be the embodiment of the perfection of the Jewish people. He is now a complete nation. How complete of a nation? It just points out the Chida. Beautiful. Look at the letters in Yisrael. The letters of Yisrael hold in them all of the names of the patriarchs and matriarchs. So the Yud is for Yitzchak and Yaakov. The Sin is for Sarah. The Reish is for Rachel and Rivka. The Aleph is for Abraham, and the Lamed is for Leah. So all of the matriarchs and patriarchs are all together, all unified in this being, in this one whole called Yisrael. And that's this beautiful thought I saw in the Chidah that I wanted to share with you. And I hope you enjoy it. And I hope we all can enjoy this parsha together. Read it, do a Shnayim Mikra Echad Targum, and certainly by all means do what you can to get as much as you can from the parsha. There's a lot of beautiful lessons for us.